Hi, and welcome back to Heritage HQ and our latest Heritage Live. Today's guest is multi-award-winning seabird photographer Rachel Bigsby, who took out both Wildlife Photographer of the Year and Bird Photographer of the Year. Self-taught, Rachel is offering her small group wildlife photography workshops on our subantarctic voyages, birding down under and beyond Fiordland, New Zealand's wildest islands, aka seabird paradise. Rachel's workshops combine her unique hands-on approach to wildlife photography and specialisation in seabirds. Rachel, so good to see you here again, and thanks for joining us today. It's fantastic to have you here and joining us also on board Heritage Adventure again this season.
I am so looking forward to it, and thank you for making time for me this evening. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My morning, your evening.
Yes, other sides of the world, but talking about the best things that matter. So.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so let's talk about wildlife photography. You are self-taught. How did that come about?
Really, it came about through a childhood interest in birds. So, my late grandfather was a real keen naturalist. He sort of instilled that passion in me for the natural world and for birds. And I was always quite a creative child and teenager. I loved painting, and particularly sunsets and dolphins. They seem to be my two. And then as I got older and I started to explore the natural world on my own, of course, I sort of went on my own journey of exploring birds and learning new things. And I first picked up a camera around the age of 14, 15. I had an Apple iPod, and that was my first camera, really for the first 3 or 4 years that I was photographing. And I would just photograph anything of interest. At that time, it was, whether it was dewdrops on blades of grass or silhouettes at sunset, just something that, I found quite pretty. After that time, I upgraded to a bridge camera. Thought I was absolutely indefeatable with this bridge camera because it had all of these pre-programmed settings and a zoom big enough to sort of go to the moon, and it was really, really exciting. And that's kind of where my creativity flourished with photography. And it wasn't until I was 18 that I got my first DSLR camera, and that was a whole new learning process to learn how manual photography works and all of the different things that come with that. And it was really a hobby that somewhat got out of control, but I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a photographer. There was nothing else I wanted to do. So I kind of just had to make it work. And of course, when you're doing something you enjoy so much and you're so passionate about, putting in crazy hours doesn't even, come to the front of your mind. So I was photographing all the time and, of course, learning all the time as a result of that, and being able to get my skill up to quite a strong level quite quickly.
Oh, excellent. And so obviously that love of the natural world, you then sort of honed in on seabirds. What was sort of what is it about the seabirds in particular that you are so fond of?
I wish I knew the answer to that. And part of me really wants to know, and part of me is happy kind of not having an answer. You know how sometimes you just have this really innate connection to something, and that's kind of what it's like
Mm.
with seabirds. And I always joke that maybe in a past life I was a fisherman or something like that. I have this real connection that can, it can be traced back to my early childhood. I've always lived on the coast. Seabirds have always been around. My granddad was a sea fisherman,
Yeah.
and so you could kind of make links like that, but it's much deeper. It runs a lot deeper. And I love the mystery behind them. I love the independence. Maybe a seabird is
Mm.
everything that I want to be, but just in bird form. I love the fact that they just disappear and voyage the oceans for years and years. And one of the things that used to really excite me until I learned a little bit more about seabirds, I used to collect feathers that had fallen and you could pick them up from the footpaths on colonies and things. And I always
Mhm.
used to think, oh wow, to think where this feather has been. It's been to the Antarctic, it's been to South America. But of course, I mean, that probably wasn't the case for many of the ones I picked up. But I used to love those stories. I love the folklore behind them. And definitely more recently, when I've been more hands-on with seabird like conservation projects and scientific research, it's the behaviors that keep me really captivated. But it all began with an accidental discovery of a northern fulmar when I was photographing sunset at the beach one day. And I didn't recognize the bird. I knew it wasn't a seagull. I could sort of work out that it wasn't any of the birds I was aware of at the time. And I went home and did my research and found out that it was a relative of albatross. And if you can imagine a
Yeah.
sort of 16-year-old girl who's obsessed with birds finding out that there's an albatross on her doorstep, I mean, it was that moment that really changed everything for me.
And what are some of the trickier things about photographing seabirds? Obviously, they spend a long time at sea, so you kind of have to go where they are and that, but you obviously had quite a bit of success photographing them.
Yeah, absolutely. The trickiest thing about photographing seabirds is the access. And because usually the easiest way to access them is by visiting the breeding colonies, which are normally always islands. So your time is then governed by the tour operator or the boat timetable or something like that. And then, of course, the second option is to go out at sea to photograph them. But then the ocean is very vast, and finding out where those
Hmm.
seabirds are can be quite tricky. I guess that, puts into all of the excitement and the adventure around photographing seabirds, but it can certainly be a challenging one. They make you work for your shot, that's for sure.
I guess that's the joy of the Subantarctic Islands and our voyages. We actually take you to the places where thousands and thousands of these birds are actually nesting and flying around and everything.
Absolutely. Like you've got that guarantee that you know where they are, they return to the same breeding colonies, but also the local knowledge of the expedition team, particularly having an
Mm,
expedition team that most of them are from New Zealand and they know the islands and the areas. Even when we weren't physically on land, they were still able to identify really good drop-off zones where the zooplankton's higher, and they had all of this knowledge about where the
yeah,
feeding grounds would be, which was invaluable.
yeah, absolutely. Our teams are amazing, which is another reason why everyone loves to travel with us. So let's talk about those awards. That's quite an achievement for someone that might be at sort of relatively early stages of their career.
Yes, thank
Although
you
if
so
you picked up that
much.
camera very early.
Yeah, I mean, I've been photographing for well over a decade, but really the career started to form about 2.5 years ago. So if you split the two up, then either way, it's quite early. I'm still only 27 myself, so to take the
Yeah.
Natural Artistry win in Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and the same year to get the Portfolio win in Bird Photographer of the Year, I was incredibly proud of that because they're two major awards and achievements for anyone that photographs wildlife. So to collect both of them really early on was good. And I was actually the youngest category winner for Wildlife Photographer of the Year, which was amazing. And one of just 8 women awarded in that year too. So there were a lot of very special things that came behind it. And as a result, I also got to judge Bird Photographer of the Year myself this year too, which was really
Oh,
interesting
wow.
to be on the other side of it and to see all the entries coming in and sort of get a bit more insight into what goes into the competitions and maybe a few tips about what would help in the future. But yeah, it's been really, really good. And it hasn't just been stills photography. I got into wildlife photography through wildlife filmmaking to begin with. And up until this point, I've even been able to film footage for David Attenborough documentaries. So it's really
Wow.
cool. Yeah, I often think back to like that 14-year-old girl that picked up an iPod and and over a decade later have started to tick off some pretty major things. And coming to the Subantarctics was another huge achievement that I really do put up there with the awards because that in itself was a dream come true.
Yeah, it's completely inaccessible. So,
Yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about both of those photographs?
absolutely. Yeah. So the photographs from the competitions.
Hmm.
The wildlife photographer of the year is a picture of northern gannets. They are my favorite seabird. They're the biggest seabird we have breeding in the UK.
Yeah.
And the image was taken off the coast of Shetland at Noss National Nature Reserve, and it was actually my first time ever visiting. But I think one of the nice things about being a photographer is that you can see potential, from the second you first arrive, even if you have no prior knowledge about it. And I remember we came round the corner, approaching the cliffs on this really small boat. There were just 4 of us on this tiny little boat. And the cliffs at North are made of sandstone, so they're really easily eroded. And with all of the harsh wind and weather and water you have in the North Sea, you can imagine how they've been
Yeah.
eroded. They're really sculptural. There's lots of nice, like soft shapes and curves in there. But there's also 22,000 gannets, and with that number of birds comes a lot of mess. So these cliffs were absolutely covered in guano, which is just a fancy word
Hmm.
for seabird poo. And
Yeah.
but of course, where the seabird poo had traced all of these shapes, it had these amazing, really abstract lines in it and symmetry and curves. It was beautiful. And having worked with gannets for a really long time, I'm well aware of their behaviour and their appearance. And I know that the courtship is really strong between them, especially in the breeding season. And they do
Hmm.
this lovely billing where they draw up their necks and they sort of tap their bills together. They make these really nice shapes with their neck. And the shapes of guano on the cliff really echoed that. And I thought, well, it'd be great to photograph the gannets doing that billing and perhaps have them framed by the different bits of guano behind them. And you'd think it'd be easy with 22,000 pairs to choose from, but it was actually really difficult just to find that one pair that were isolated. It's one of those
Yeah.
sort of cliche stories where it very almost didn't happen. It was one of three shots. The first one was out of focus. The second one, the heads were cut off because, we're moving on a boat.
Ah,
And the third one was
yeah.
that one that won. I took it literally as we were driving backwards on the boat, heading back to land. So that was pretty special. And for Best
Absolutely.
Photographer of the Year, it was a portfolio. So it was 6 images, I think, of different seabirds around
Hmm.
the UK, captured in my style, which is very much the natural artistry, the creative perspectives, quite a lot of black and white photography, something slightly different. So it was puffins and shags and gannets and razorbills in a way that most people hadn't seen before. So the
Yeah.
portfolio was a nice collection and a nice sort of homage to UK seabirds.
Oh, awesome. Well, congratulations. It's a
Thank
remarkable
you.
achievement, and they are amazing photos. So well awarded. Last season, you traveled down to the New Zealand and Australian Sub-Antarctic Islands with us, and I think you've got a special photo to share with us now from the voyage. What was your initial thoughts when you went down there, like these being the world's most remote Sub-Antarctic Islands, but also these incredible wildlife havens?
Yeah, I mean, the Subantarctic Islands are truly one of the last wild frontiers. And people say that and they call lots of different places that, but it really was the case for the
Mm,
Subantarctic. It felt like stepping into a very pure, very untouched world where nature was still in command. And there really was that constant sense of, not being the superior species for once. Like it actually really felt like we were in nature's world and all of the wildlife came first because there's such strict biosecurity and avian influenza regulations. You were really
mm,
put in your place as a human being. And I think that was really important as a part of the experience because it enhanced the fact that you were in this really special, really highly protected area. I was completely just staggered by the number of seabirds, the dramatic landscapes, and just a sense of
mm.
isolation. I've been to the Arctic, I've been to the Antarctic, but I've never been in the middle of the ocean like that, that real sense of isolation. And as you can imagine, I did capture hundreds of images when I was there. There are some that I haven't even looked at yet because there are just so many to work through. But the one that really stood out as my favorite was an in-camera multiple exposure of the king penguin colony on
Mhm.
Macquarie Island.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was definitely my highlight of the trip, although it's hard to choose. And I loved it. It was my first time seeing king penguins. They are a species that I'd been desperate to photograph. And I really
Yeah.
wanted to capture something different, something that I would leave being really satisfied with. And I wanted to do something that combined the beauty of the portraits of the king penguins, but also the density of the colony. And so, yeah, I created this
Yeah.
little in-camera multiple exposure. It's a two different shots blended together, all did with one camera, one lens, and stood in the exact same spot at the colony, which is a real testament as to like the creativity that you can harness when you're in an environment like that. But for me, it's really nice because it just captures the whole feel and the busyness and the beauty and everything sort of rolled into one.
Excellent. And I mean, these are experiences you'll be able to share with the people traveling with you this season
Absolutely.
as
And I
well.
cannot wait. I cannot wait.
So the birding down there is incredible. Were there any particular birds that stole your heart?
It's so hard to answer that. I think the Southern Royal Albatross was spectacular, especially
Hmm.
towards the end of the day when they started gamming, and to hear that because
Yeah.
it's one of those behaviors that you've seen on the David Attenborough documentaries, you've seen on National
Yeah.
Geographic and Disney Nature, and then it's in front of you, and to watch it is amazing, but to hear the noise for yourself, the real noise that hasn't been dubbed in
Yeah.
an edit afterwards, like that was really special. And we had a really windy day as well on Campbell Island. So the albatross was soaring really close, and there are a few times where I had at least twice they sort of skimmed the back of my head, and they don't look like they're flying fast, but because they're such big birds, so the noise is actually
Mm,
really intense. So again,
yeah,
really cool because you just constantly felt like you were just in their world, which is really good. I enjoyed seeing the royal penguins very, very much, and it was fun every
yeah,
day, like spotting the different endemic species because that was it. Kind of felt a bit like a birding bingo because like there was something you
yeah,
had to see
exactly.
it when you were there, so it was really a case of like rushing to the outer decks and getting the binoculars up, getting the lens up, and like, ticking off another bird for the area, which was nice. And surprisingly, as someone that loves seabirds so much, I really enjoyed the teal. Like we went to go and see the
Hmm.
teal, and that was yeah, something that I perhaps was a little closed-minded to before, but I was bouncing off the excitement of everyone else in my zodiac. Like that was the bird that they were there to see, and it was really exciting. And of course, the bull of shearwater, beautiful. So many. I mean, I could just
Yeah,
list every single species. But moving away from
pretty
birds,
much.
I also loved the elephant seals. I hadn't seen elephant seals before. I definitely hadn't appreciated how huge they are. And
Mm,
when we landed on Macquarie Island, they were everywhere. And of course, some of the younger ones are a good size and big enough. But then you get to the bulls, and they are massive. And
yeah.
again, like you see them on television, you see them on the documentaries. There's no real scale, so you don't get the understanding of how big they are until it's in front of you. And oh my goodness, they were huge. And the smell will stay with me for life.
They're also quite noisy as well.
Yes, so noisy. All sorts of strange noises coming out of there.
And also, quite remarkable down there is the megaherbs, the flora that has grown to sort of like supersized proportions down
Yeah,
there with the
yeah.
incredible colors in that. That must have been quite captivating for the younger you who used to take photos of dew on grass and things, right?
Yeah, very much so. And I learned so much from the young explorers that were on board because there were quite a few of
Hmm.
them that were botanists and they were so excited. And again, I was really bouncing off their enthusiasm because I appreciated the mega herbs and I loved to see the forests and I really liked it, but I didn't really understand what was going on. And I loved that opportunity to be on a ship with like-minded people that were also passionate and interested in lots of different diverse things. And as a result, whether it was recaps or whether it was when we were out on land, I learned so much from everyone around, just hearing these little anecdotes or these little facts every now and again. It was really, really special.
Yeah, I think part of it is that sort of education of where you're going, so that you, when you are there, you are truly immersed in it. So there'll be lectures from our guides who across everything from conservation, history, the wildlife, the even like down to birds and specific species, and then yeah, the botany down there and geology. I mean,
Oh my
there's a
gosh,
lot
yeah.
going on.
Yeah, it really ticks a
Yes,
lot of boxes.
so expedition travel can take you out of your comfort zone. Obviously, that would be could be challenging for capturing an image. How do you prepare for that?
Preparation, practice, and having an
Yeah.
open mind, like that's really, really key. So you have to prepare for flexibility with expedition photography because
Hmm.
it's all about adapting to the moment and lowering expectations to leave room for that real expedition excitement. That's important. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I always say to anyone, with whether they're getting into wildlife photography or they've been a wildlife photographer, the most important thing and the most valuable thing you can do for yourself is to understand the behavior of your subject before you photograph it. So you could turn up on this expedition having never seen this species before that you want to photograph, but perhaps you've done a little bit of research beforehand online, reading a book, watching a documentary or a YouTube about that, or whether you just arrive at the location and you put your camera down for the first 5 or 10 minutes. It's really difficult to resist that temptation just to fire off thousands of shots.
Mm.
But just to observe what's going on around you, because it can be really overwhelming. And when you just step back for a moment and you watch what's going on, you have that understanding. You start to pick up on different patterns, behavioral patterns and routines. And of course, seabirds have got really strong courtship rituals. So once you start to yeah, have build up this little understanding in your mind, it can really help you to predict the next shots, and also to understand what you want to get out of the day. And one of the things that I used to do when I started photographing was to photograph anything and everything. And then you'd come away with lots of shots that you were happy with, but perhaps not that one that you were extremely happy with. And now I try to really narrow it down in my mind and think that I want to focus on this portrait, a close up of the feathers, something abstract, and I have these little mini projects to work on when I'm there. Otherwise, you can end up firing off all of these shots somewhat aimlessly, and because you are just completely overwhelmed by what's going on. And then you get back onto the ship and you look at what you've got, and they're beautiful photos, but perhaps not, on reflection, when you're out of the environment and you've had time to calm down, you think, oh, if I'd have just taken a step to the left, or if I'd have just done that. And so really it's a mixture of those two. Yeah.
Excellent. And it's good that you bring up that flexibility. You probably heard one of Heritage's mantras, being rigidly flexible, which relates to taking the opportunity when it arrives. So working in with the weather, with the wildlife, and everything that's happening. And yeah, it might not be to a schedule that you're used to, but when there's the opportunity to get ashore and do that, that's when we take it. And I guess that's the same for photography. You don't know when the opportunity is going to present itself, right?
Exactly that.
Yeah. So what advice would you give someone who is considering doing an expedition photography workshop for the first time?
I would say, first and foremost, don't get too caught up in the technical side. Of course, have a good understanding of your camera settings so that you're getting some good photos. But the best shots really do come from patience and observation, and also just following
Mhm.
your heart. If you like something, then capture it. Don't worry too much about, will this win a competition? Will people on Instagram like this? Those things are really important that you photograph for yourself, because this is your expedition, your trip, your memories. Be ready for everything, as you just said. Like, wildlife moves really quickly, conditions change fast,
Yeah.
so always have your camera accessible. I would recommend that you practice photographing in different weather conditions before your trip, not only just to give yourself some extra practice, but to understand how your camera works. For example, if it's really cold and you've just left the ship and you put your lens hood on, that lens hood can retain the warmth from the ship, and then you'll have a sort of
Mm.
lens blur and haze in front of your camera. Just little things like that in the moment when you're so busy and excited, you don't really notice. And one of the things I've started to do is to take video as well as photo, because the still image is tremendously beautiful, but the video will also capture all of those sounds and
Mm.
movements that you experience. And it's also something nice to look
Yeah.
back on when you get home. And as I said before, and it sounds counterintuitive considering that I'm here to run a photography workshop, but also remember just to put your camera down sometimes and enjoy the experience, because it's so easy to forget to just take in the moment when you're always looking through the lens. I'm guilty of it all the time. And you get back on the ship and you think, was I even there? You're there because you're so busy, like being a photographer. But it's also nice just to be there and be a human and to enjoy where you are, because it's such a once in a lifetime experience.
That really is one of the golden rules, right? Of being in the moment and having that presence and just, yeah, just taking it all in, not through the lens, but even if it's just, finding a few minutes to yourself and just sort of really absorbing yourself in that moment is actually quite, it's kind of where the magic happens, really. That's what sort of
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you miss a
gets you
really
in
good
there.
shot.
It
That's
doesn't.
the way it goes.
Yeah. So what to pack is the endless dilemma. What would be the top 5 essentials you would need to take?
Okay. Subantarctic's weatherproof camera protection. Because the conditions
Yeah.
can be harsh. Salt spray is your worst enemy on any camera equipment. And of course,
Mhm.
one minute it'll be sunny, then it'll be raining. We had hail, sun, and snow and rain all in one day, all in the space of like an hour.
Yeah.
It really changes a lot. Spare batteries and memory cards, because the cold weather,
Mhm.
as we know, eats through battery life. Not that it's too cold in the subantarctics, but also you'll be photographing way more images than you usually would at home. So you'd be surprised at how quickly you can get through battery. And nobody wants to see that, like memory card full, no space left when you've
Hmm.
got like 2 hours
Yeah.
left on your trip. So always have spares of everything. And I would recommend a versatile zoom lens. Something like a 100 to 400 is perfect for capturing the close-ups, but also distant wildlife, because of course, while we are on land, we can get relatively close to the wildlife. When we're at sea, it's a slightly different story. Or even on zodiacs, if the swell is too much that we stay
Hmm.
back, you really want to have the option that you can get close if you need to. Um, Good gloves, and especially gloves that give you good dexterity with your camera, because you need to keep warm that you can operate your camera, but you don't want gloves that are
Yeah.
too thick that you can't operate your camera. So it's handy to, yeah, try a few and to photograph using your gloves before you come on the expedition, because you might suddenly realize that some buttons are now inaccessible and you might have to find ways to work around that. And most importantly, especially considering that we'll be zodiacking every day if we can, a dry bag or a waterproof backpack, essential for protecting camera
Hmm.
gear during the zodiac landings, especially if it's a wet landing, or if we go out and it's beautiful weather and then suddenly it starts raining or snowing. So everything's unpredictable. So with that in mind, versatility, protection is key.
Excellent. And so you talk about going on the zodiac. So I know that when we visit the snares, essentially that is all zodiac because there's no landing, but you get to go to see the snares crested penguin, navigating the penguin slide, which is an incredible experience.
Yes.
Obviously, you're in a moving vehicle, the zodiac. What sort of advice do you have for people for photographing from something that's moving? Obviously, you took one of your award-winning shots from a moving vessel.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And it's certainly something that, having run lots of different workshops from a zodiac, it's usually the first thing that people who haven't photographed a zodiac find challenging before. So really, the top tips of to use a fast shutter speed. I would always say at least 1,200, just to counteract the extra
Hmm.
movement that you're going to be experiencing. You can somewhat stabilize yourself by keeping your elbows close to your body and using a lighter lens if that's possible too. And bearing in mind that some of the zodiac explorations might be 2 hours long, if you do have a really heavy lens with you, and also considering that you can't use a tripod or a monopod in the zodiacs, which some people don't realize, it's sometimes worth perhaps sacrificing a little bit of lens length to ensure that you can photograph
Yeah.
comfortably throughout the whole time. Because what you don't want is to have an incredibly long, amazing, sharp lens, but you can only shoot with it for 10 minutes before your arms start aching, and then you can't use time. Um, Again, be ready for spray. So just a simple microfiber cloth just to wipe those water droplets off the front of your lens, and a dry bag. And also I would recommend shooting in bursts because this just increases your chances of getting a sharp shot. Even if you are the most stable photographer in the world, we only just need a tiny little wave that just knocks us slightly,
Mm.
and you've got some movement. So it's just doing everything you can to sort of, yeah, counteract the movement that you experience on the zodiac. But it's all good fun. And one of the great things about this workshop is that our numbers are limited to give extra space in the zodiacs. Sometimes, especially for photographers, when you've got a big camera bag and you want to change lenses and do all of these different things, traditionally on a zodiac, if you're not on a workshop, you can be a little bit limited for space because they're not designed for people laying out all of their camera equipment like that. So on this workshop, we're really going to have a little bit of extra space to play with. So you're not elbowing someone, you haven't necessarily got someone in your shot. So be trying to do everything that we can to make it as simple as possible. But with those little tips, it shouldn't be too difficult.
Excellent, some great advice here. So looping back to the workshops, obviously you mentioned they're smaller numbers, so they are restricted to just 8 guests to join you on each voyage. What can they expect on the voyage and on the ship as well with regards to the
Well,
workshop?
they're in for an immersive experience, I'll tell you that. On board, we have interactive workshops, and the real magic happens when we're off the ship, whether we're capturing
Hmm.
albatross in flight, penguins on the beach, or these dramatic seascapes. I will be guiding the participants in the field, giving hands-on advice, practical advice, offering advice about how to create photographs that are unique or artistic, and also technically correct. Although I'm a very artistic photographer myself, I wouldn't want people to think that would be forced upon them. So I'm very flexible with whatever someone's style is. years. But I do find that most of the time people are really ready to explore something new and to do something different, which is really rewarding for me as a workshop leader as well. And also we'll review images together. I'll be offering lots of feedback,
Yeah.
we'll be learning from each other, having these little daily recaps. So I really will be accessible all the time throughout the trip. And it's going to be an absolutely incredible experience, especially considering that we're visiting some islands that, you know, most people in the world would never ever get to reach. I really want to be there to make sure people can leave with the best images they possibly can.
Excellent. That sounds awesome. I think I'll just loop back because you were talking about the Campbell Island flightless teal earlier,
Yeah.
and that was such a big highlight for a lot of people. I just like to throw out there the founder of Heritage Expeditions, Rodney Russ, was involved in the rediscovery of that bird 50 years ago this year, when they thought it had been extinct due to predation on those islands. But yeah, he was involved in that. So the Campbell Island teal, flightless teal, quite close to Heritage Expeditions' heart as well.
Yeah, well, that is an amazing, amazing fact. I'm so pleased to hear that. I mean, you know, because when we were there, they were telling us how it's such a rare duck and it was near extinction, and that's really
Mm,
special to hear.
yeah, no, it's wonderful. Well, I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much for your time, Rachel. Wonderful to have you here with us today, sharing your excitement, enthusiasm, and obviously your tremendous skill set with people when they join you on these workshops. And we look forward to welcoming you on board Heritage Adventure later this year.
Thank,
Take it easy, and until next time, safe travels.
thank you
See
so
ya.
much. Bye.